Tonight we're in Winchester. Welcome to Question Time. On our panel tonight, Suella Braverman, until recently a government minister for Brexit, until she quit over Theresa May's deal. She now makes her views known from the back benches. John Healey, Labour's shadow housing secretary and a former campaigner for disability rights. A journalist who is chief leader writer at The Observer and former senior policy advisor to Ed Miliband, Sonia Soda. Ian Anderson, executive chairman of the communications agency Cicero Group and an ambassador for the LGBT charity Stonewall. And last but not least, Daily Express columnist and radio host on LBC's weekday breakfast programme, Nick Ferrari. So welcome to our panel, welcome to all of you who've come here tonight, and of course welcome to you at home as well. And as always, you can argue along from home using hashtag BBCQT on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We are everywhere. So let's have our first question tonight. Alan Hampton.
Will the country stomach a delay to Brexit beyond March the 29th?
Suella, would you stomach a delay?
No, I wouldn't, and I doubt many people would. Most people just want the government to get on with Brexit and to deliver the result of the referendum. We've been talking about this for years now. We've spent many, many hours and months debating it, not only in the referendum, but also in Parliament and in the papers. It has been a divisive issue. We've got a plan. The Prime Minister's plan is to deliver Brexit on March the 29th of this year. That is enshrined in law. And the reason for your question, sir, I think, is that we're finding ourselves in a bit of a mess right now. It's important.
And whose fault is that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's very important to remember that MPs voted to delegate this decision to the British people. They didn't have to do that, but by a huge margin, MPs decided to outsource the decision. Yeah, exactly. They also voted to trigger Article 50 in the knowledge of all the consequences and implications that that would mean, leaving after 2 years with or without a deal. Why are we in this mess? I'm afraid we're in this mess because there is a minority of self-appointed MPs who have never gotten over the result of the referendum, frankly, and believe that they know better than the majority of British people, believe that their view matters more than the majority of people who voted for Brexit-backing parties at the general election, and are trying to stop Brexit, and that should never be allowed to happen. Yeah.
John Healey, will the country stomach a Brexit delay beyond March 29th? Would Labour stomach that delay? Because it's beginning to look like you might.
Delay may well become inevitable, and directly because of the mess we're in. But we're in this mess because of the failure of the negotiations in this government over the last 2 years. Now, the priority is to make sure that Britain just doesn't crash out at the end of March with no deal in place, and to get a good deal in place so that we can see through Brexit. Now, that's the task at hand, but I have to say, with the government in chaos, nobody clear that or confident that Theresa May has a plan to get through this impasse, and with the risk of a crash-out Brexit in less than 9 weeks' time, then it's sensible for Parliament next week to start to try and take some control and some more influence in this process, because clearly the government is no longer in charge. And 230 vote defeat, the biggest defeat in history for a government, tells you that this is not a minority of MPs across the House who will not give up on the idea of remaining in the European Union.
So will Labour support a delay, an extension to Article 50?
We're in the market, I have to say, as Parliament. Well, will we support a number of amendments that could do that in the vote next week? Well, we'll get more.
Respectfully, John.
No, hang on, Nick. Let's let John answer. Because will you support an extension?
No, look, we're in the market like Parliament is for making sure that we don't crash out at the end of March, that we rescue the situation where we got totally failed negotiations. Delay may need to become an option, and we'll take our judgment on the votes, and when the issues are much clearer and closer to Tuesday. But I have to say, the ball's in the government's court. We could avoid delay. We must avoid no deal, but that requires Theresa May recognising she's got to shift the lines of her deal towards the common sensible ground that is there within Parliament. But at the moment, I have to say, she won't show she's willing to do that, because she's still held hostage by the hardliners in her own party and the Brexit separatists.
Right. John.
Lee.
Thank you. Yes, John. You talk about the failure of government, you talk about the failure of negotiations, and in part you are right. But there's a far greater failure confronting all of the people in this room and the people watching that tonight, and without being personal to you or to you, that is the failure of 650 people to whom we pay £77,000 a year minimum, and you get more as you go up the scale, and you have failed... You have failed to implement what you were told to do. You are at risk of losing the will and the support of the great British public. I speak, regrettably, as a divorced man. When I got divorced, I instructed a lawyer to go and sort my case. She did not come back 2.5 years later and say, actually, we think it'd be a good idea if you move in with your bloody ex-wife. She sorted out a divorce. That's what you should be doing.
The woman in the glasses.
The result of the referendum was on the basis of 52 to 48. You wouldn't even change the constitution of your local golf club on that. So that is why people still want to talk about it, and that is why, with all the extra information that people now have that they didn't have at the time, there are many people who would change their vote.
The woman at the back.
I assume the reason we're talking about a delay is because there's been no cross-party collaboration until very recently. The vote was decided 2 years ago. Why has it taken until now to get cross-party collaboration?
The man in the blue jumper there.
£39 billion. That's a negotiating bargain chip that could make them come back to the table. If they don't give Britain a good deal, they don't get their £39 billion. Simple as that.
Ian Anson.
I'm in despair. I don't know about the rest of you, but we had a referendum. The country's very divided, as has been put. I think the country remains still very divided. But our politicians, as Nick says, can't seem to work it out. I've been following politics for most of my life, and I think this is the most dismal parliament I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Fiona, but business is in despair. We've heard from Airbus today. We've heard from James Dyson earlier this week. I find myself in a very strange position. I find myself in a very strange position as somebody who did support Remain, but is now settled with the idea of leaving. I'm going to keep my business in this country. I'm going to pay my taxes in this country. He's built a fantastic business. It's a world-beating business. But at this moment, the signal that James Dyson has sent this country is utterly abysmal. It is abysmal. And I think, just finally, Fiona, I think our politicians need to come together. This has all been arse about face. When the election took place in 2017 and Theresa May lost her majority, Parliament should have set its red lines at that moment, not at 5 minutes to midnight.
Now, Suella, I know you want to come back on the business question, and actually we are going to have a question on that, so if you'll just forgive me for a moment, because Sonia must come...
Point, because about John's position of the Labour Party potentially supporting an extension of Article 50, I think is very dangerous and leads to something that Nick said. If you're going to do that, that means we may be participating in the European Parliament elections in May. And I tell you, John, if your party is going to support a disregarding of the democratic instruction from the British people, get ready to see Tommy Robinson, MEP, and a surge of the far right, something I never want to see happen in this country.
Right, look...
But, Suella, a colleague, can I just say...
colleague of yours, Jacob Rees-Mogg, is now saying if he had to choose between no deal and Mrs May's deal, he'd have no hesitation of opting for no deal if that was on the table, but even Mrs May's deal would be better than not leaving at all. Are you softening along those lines?
Listen, we have made our views very clear last week in the historic defeat. The deal, I voted against that deal with a heavy heart, never having rebelled against the Conservatives before, because, frankly, that deal offered a fake Brexit. It locked the UK into a customs union indefinitely. It annexed Northern Ireland to make it an EU colony.
Hang on, isn't this the Brexit deal that you were involved in negotiating?
I was never part of the negotiation team.
But hang on, but you were,
one
one of the architects of the Brexit deal, though, Suella.
Differently.
So what does DICSU actually do, Suella?
I was working in the department last year.
What does it do?
Well, I was responsible in the department for implementation. Decisions were made.
So you weren't making any decisions?
Far above my head. I was a junior minister. And unfortunately, I would agree with the gentleman. The negotiations have been a failure. We've offered £39 billion for no guarantee of a free trade agreement in return. We have compromised on the implementation period. We have compromised on accepting particular rules. We are also, in the deal that we voted down last week, compromising on the integrity of the United Kingdom, and which is why it was so unacceptable. But there is still time. I want to be a voice of hope. There is still time to salvage the situation. The Prime Minister still has time to strike a good deal with the EU. We've set this out in a better deal.
Hang on,
she can go back to the EU. She can renegotiate. The EU wants a deal more than they want a no deal. And we need to make sure that that can happen.
A long way from the original question, so I'm just going to drag ourselves back to it, and I'll come to you in a minute, John, because I know I want to talk to you about business in particular. But Sonia, the question was, will the country stomach a Brexit delay beyond March the 29th?
I think the country will stomach it because I think it needs to happen. If you look at what's going on...
You're not getting a lot of support here from the audience.
Actually, I can see a couple of faces, a few people, a few hands of support there. So if we look at what's going on in Parliament, we've seen a massive failure of leadership, not just on one side, on both sides. Right. We've got Theresa May's deal, which absolutely does not deliver on what people were promised in the 2016 referendum. On the other side, we've got the fantasy land of Jeremy Corbyn saying, hey, just give the power to me, I'll go to the EU and get a better deal. That's absolutely not going to happen. So we've got a massive failure on both sides. Time is running out. Thank goodness for MPs like Yvette Cooper, Dominic Grieve, the real grown-ups in the room. These MPs, they are the grown-ups in the room. They're doing what's really needed. They know we're in uncharted waters. They know our politics is in crisis. That's why they're trying to get an extension. And if I could just come back to the excellent point that the lady made in the second row. This was a very narrow referendum result. Now, nobody wants there to be another referendum, ideally. The idea of that doesn't exactly make my heart fill with joy. But so much has changed in the last 2.5 years. We've got a deal on the table now. It doesn't deliver what people were promised. The world has changed. We've got an openly hostile president of America who is protectionist. He's not going to give us a free trade deal people talked about in 2016. And Parliament is gridlocked. We have to go back to the people. We have to put Theresa May's deal to the people. It is the only democratic thing to do. An important principle of democracy is periodically, when big things change after the passage of time, you go back and you check in with voters. How is that anti-democratic? I just can't see it.
Let me just put some of this to John. So, John, you've got Sonia describing some of your colleagues. You've got Sonia describing some of your colleagues as the grown-ups in the room. I'm not sure what that says, what you're saying about John. But how do you respond to that?
There need be no delay if there is a deal. But it's quite clear from the 230 vote defeat last week, the deal does not lie with Theresa May and the hardliners in her party. It could lie, as we've said for some time, in a deal that looks towards a customs union, a closer single market relationship, and some of the guarantees on things like workers and consumer standards. And the European Union have made clear, if the government is prepared to shift in that direction, As Barnier said last week, the European Union would look immediately and favourably on such a shift. That's what's needed. That will only happen if the sensible centre ground in the House of Commons comes together, as it has already, to say no to no deal, but comes together and makes sure that we can get a government that gets a deal, that gets a majority in the House of Commons, to get it into law, to respect the result of the referendum. That's been our consistent approach, but the government and Theresa May for 2 years have refused to recognise the reality that that vote last week has to confront them with.
There's a lot of strong feeling I can see in the room. Let's just hear from the man in the glasses there. Yes, you, sir.
We all thought the parliamentarians had a very bad time during the so-called expenses debate, but now I think the democratic vote of the country was to leave. Let's leave, but let's call the EU's bluff, and let's go along the line right to the bitter end. I remember many times when the clock is stopped, I think they use that expression in the EU, stop that clock. No, hold back, as the gentleman behind said, the 39 billion, and let's just see what Barney and his bunch of cronies want to do about it then.
The woman at the back, right at the back there.
I voted Remain. I was a hesitant Remainer, I have to say. I think the EU needs a great deal of radical reform. The thing that concerns me is a lot of Remainers I know, they seem to have developed a very, I think, naive attitude towards what would happen if we had a people's vote. I know a number of Leavers from the far left, and also, sadly, some who've become, I would say, enamoured of Tommy Robinson. So you've got the two extremes, you've got all sorts of people in between, all sorts of ages, all sorts of education. Not a single one of them have changed their minds. And you only have to watch programmes like Question Time and listen to phone-ins, which I sadly often do. You will always
Nothing
find...
wrong with that, madam.
You will always find...
Yes, that's how Nick makes a living, he's pointing out.
Exactly. Yes.
There's your listener.
My audience. If I may, can I just...
Hang on, no, let's let the lady finish.
Actually, I've been interviewed by Nick Ferrari twice.
Shall we let Nick speak then?
No, can I just finish what I was saying? The thing is, I think a great many Leavers, the worst way to try and persuade a Leaver to change their minds is to have this patronising attitude where you tell them they didn't know what they were voting for.
Yeah.
I think as a Remainer, as I say, I don't think there's any certainty about what would happen if we had another vote. And if it was marginally for Leave again, what's going to happen then? Do we start the whole thing again?
I mean, there have been fantastic points from the floor, and I'll address them all briefly. Sonia, you talk about the grown-ups in the room, such as Dominic Grieve and Yvette Cooper, both of whom were elected on manifestos in which they said that they would support the views of the British public and bring about a Brexit. So it's important to remember that. I would also address that point respectfully to the lady here with the glasses who said you wouldn't change the constitution of your golf club or cricket club or whatever you said. You're right, but there has been that general election since then, and more than 80% of the electorate voted for parties that wanted to deliver Brexit. I thought the point at the back with the lady in the dark top was superb. There should have been more cross-party. That's possibly one of Theresa May's, who undoubtedly has worked hard at it, but is probably one of her biggest faults, that she didn't seek cross-party at the start. And to the gentleman over there who said £39 billion is quite a lot of money, I would suggest that is a tremendous bargaining chip, and we should start to play it much, much harder.
Now, we touched on this earlier on. Ian, you touched on this as well. You did also briefly about the effect on Brexit for business. So we've got a question here from Aaron Potter. Aaron, where are you?
If James Dyson really believes in Brexit, why has he moved his head office to Singapore?
John Healey, now you described this, I heard you yesterday, as a kick. How did you describe it? A kick in the...
Kick in the groin for Britain. Especially after taking public money to help develop his business. And especially after him being a flagship for Britain and British industry across the world. And
I mean, he
to be
says
honest-
it is unrelated to Brexit.
Well, he may do, but he may say, well, the timing's coincidence, not a consequence. But what a bad signal at a time when Jaguar Land Rover, when Rolls-Royce, when Airbus, some of the brand names for Britain in the world, are saying, look, we're in a mess. The risk of no deal, I'm sorry to say to this gentleman, is the view from business and trade unions and virtually everyone that would be a disaster for Britain to crash out in that way. When they're saying, for goodness sake, get your act together, get the deal done, there is the opportunity to do this, but it requires Theresa May and the government to say, right, we recognise that there can be no majority in the House of Commons that relies on the Brexit separatists, the hardliners that at the moment have held her hostage. She must look to the centre ground. That's a better reflection of the vote in the referendum. Let's get a deal that's good and better for Britain than the one we've got, and then let's start to rebuild the country beyond Brexit. And that's the challenge, and the ball's in Theresa May's court to make that happen.
Suella, can I just quote to you the Airbus chief executive who today said, please don't listen to the Brexiteers' madness, which asserts that because we have huge plants here, we will not move, we will always be here. They are wrong. Are you one of the bad Brexiteers he's referring to?
Oh, I hope not. Do I look like a bad Brexiteer?
Not a bad one, a mad one, I think is
right.
the word he was using.
Bad. Don't answer that. Well, on Airbus, but I'd like to answer on Dyson a bit as well, because I do disagree with what Ian and John have said. They've completely misrepresented one of our greatest British success stories, an inventor, an innovator. Let me finish. An inventor, an entrepreneur, a risk taker, who has developed jobs, who has generated research and development. He is someone who's moving two members of his workforce to Singapore. He has categorically set out in an article which I referred to you in the Daily Telegraph today that this is not about Brexit. It's because of flourishing markets in Asia, and he's already been transferring parts of his operation to Asia to capitalise on that booming success. He maintains a lot of his operations in the UK. He skills up the next generation of engineers and innovators. The more and the better he does globally, the more we benefit in the UK. And I think we should be championing British success stories, not knocking them down every time they make an investment decision.
But this is in a week where This is coming in a week where P&O is registering its vessels in Cyprus, Sony's moving its European HQ to Amsterdam. Sonia.
Well, it's not about Brexit. He would say that, wouldn't he? James Dyson is a hypocrite.
Right.
It's really
in
important...
fairness, James Dyson is not here to answer for himself, so I think we should be careful what we say about it.
Well, it's really important symbolically where a company places its headquarters. He's certainly not putting his money where its mouth is. And I think whether it's James Dyson, whether it's Nigel Farage, who's made sure two of his children have got German passports, whether it's Nigel Lawson, who's applied for French residency, these are the Brexit elite. They know there are going to be consequences, and they've protected themselves against it. They don't care about ordinary voters whose parents have retired to Spain. They don't care about ordinary voters whose kids can't go abroad, who won't be able to go abroad and study at university anymore. These people are hypocrites. They're protecting themselves against the impact of Brexit, and they don't care what impact it's going to have on ordinary voters up and down the country.
Sonia, Nick, briefly, because I don't want to get round the audience.
Very briefly, just listen to what Suella said. There are 4,000 people. 2 staff have gone. I've never been very good at maths. Hold on, I listened to you. I've never been very good at maths, but that leaves 3,000... Hold on, this is a gentleman. Can we please stop calling this man a hypocrite? This is a man who paid £175 million in tax last year. That built a lot of hospitals and a lot of schools. And lastly, he sells 4% of his output in the UK. He's actually underscoring what people say about Brexit. The new markets are Singapore, the new markets are Asia, and that's why he's going there.
Nick, you have hit the nail on the head.
Not for the first time.
He paid 175 million quid in taxes.
Gladly. Have you read his article?
He is moving the domicile of his business, and therefore the tax will no longer be available for public services in this country.
Is that definite?
That's his tax.
That has not been established where the company will be paying its taxes.
If you move the headquarters of a company, tax will move.
Well, you're taking a supposition respectfully, because I don't know that Sir James is actually on the move physically, and so he'll still pay his personal tax into the Exchequer, I would suggest.
I think, in fact, we don't actually know this, so let's not speculate about this. I will come back to you, Suella, forgive me, but I just want to come to the man in the back there, yes, in the corner.
Regarding James Dyson, I think it's a fallacy to use Brexit as an excuse and throw this at him. James Dyson actually has form in the past where he has threatened to leave Britain if he hasn't received certain funding for his R&D. I agree with the gentleman there where he said that by moving the company's headquarters to Singapore, then the tax part of that will actually disappear. But what you're failing to actually point out that James Dyson has actually invested quite a lot, especially in the Malmesbury project, through his university course, the amount of money that he gives to Imperial College.
Yes.
I'm by no means a James Dyson fan, but what you have to sort of look at it in the context of it is actually business. Yeah. As for Airbus, I actually heard the CEO today on the TV say what he did do. What people fail to realise as well, that Airbus is actually heavily subsidised by the French government. Yeah. So there you go. There's another reason why that he would actually be in his best interest for Airbus to actually remain in.
I would just like to know, why is the government not listening to the business people of this country and actually stopping this ridiculous thing called Brexit that, quite frankly, is the most absurd thing that will go down in history as an embarrassment for this country, which we've already become across the world.
Man, it's always good to see you've not held back. Suella.
Well, I disagree with you, madam, with respect, on the point about this being the worst decision that the country made. I think this is one of the best decisions this country will be making for the future generations. But on the voice of business, you're absolutely right that we should be listening to the voice of business. They employ many people, and it's all about livelihoods at the end of the day. But we must always question the voice of business. They're not always speaking.
Do you question Jaguar Land Rover, who are extending their April car production shutdown due to potential Brexit disruption? Ford, they're saying that their internal calculations suggest they'll face a bill of £612 million.
And that's one side of the coin. Let's just say, on Airbus,
well, it's just their business, that's what they're saying.
You're right, and I'll come to it. On Airbus, I was disappointed to learn today that the government had actually asked Airbus to make these comments public. So this kind of conspiracy and complicitness is not healthy. They should be reassuring businesses that it's going to be OK on March 29, not asking them to agitate to put pressure on MPs. Secondly, it's very difficult to see what Airbus's complaints are, because when it comes to potentially tariffs that they're scared of in a no-deal scenario, that doesn't stack up, because on aerospace and aviation parts, they are zero tariffed, even in a no-deal scenario. On safety certification, the EU has made it clear that even in a no-deal scenario, safety certificates will be recognised. And if it's about queues at the border, Dover and today Calais, the lead man at the port of Calais, has made it unequivocally clear that even in a no-deal scenario, no queues will happen. Transports will be allowed to, lorries will be allowed to flow, and actually,
is that a guarantee?
There will be no extra administrative checks at the border.
Is that a guarantee? There will be no.
That is what the leader of the mayor of the Port of Calais has said.
It's the chairman of the Calais.
HMRC, talking about Dover, has said no extra checks will be applied at Dover in a no-deal scenario, and I stand by what he has said. And that's on the record. So I think all this talk about no deal being a catastrophe for business has to be taken with a pinch of salt. There are many, many hundreds and thousands of businesses who are looking forward to Brexit, who are enthusiastic about a no-deal Brexit and the opportunities for control over our rules and open markets for their goods. There are great opportunities to a WTO Brexit. Let's go get them.
Absolutely. Ian, you're a businessman. Ian, you're a businessman and you have an office in Dublin, is that right, as a result of Brexit? So what do you feel about what Suella's had to say?
So, look, in business, like in all of our lives, you take calculated risks. But I fear right now we are in a situation where, because of the fact that our politicians have not worked it out yet, people who've been in government, people who are on our opposition benches, and we're at 5 minutes to midnight, we're sort of rolling the casino chips and hoping everything's going to be all right on the night. And look, businesses are speaking out. They spoke out in 2016. I think to some extent they've been a bit tone deaf. I mean, I'm reconciled to Brexit. I voted to remain. But right now, I think we're in a situation where it's not Project Fear in terms of what some of these businesses...
Is it having an actual impact on your business?
Well, the reason we opened in Dublin, the reason we opened in Ireland is because businesses are wanting to use the European passport, you know, and I'm following the business like any good business person will do. That's the reason we're in Ireland.
Can I just hear from the young man there in the striped top?
Sonia, earlier you said that James Dyson perhaps shouldn't have moved to Singapore based on the fact that it sends a bad signal to the country. You also stated that Suella was living in Fantasyland with her views on Brexit. Are you perhaps suggesting that James Dyson should have made a business decision based on sentiment and a symbol, or on the symbolisation that his decision would have sent a signal to a country, instead of the financial benefits of moving to a new market in a separate part of the world?
Yeah.
I think it is a good point, but my answer to that would be, I think that when you stand up on a platform and you argue for something like Brexit, you've got to put your money where your mouth is. And when you choose to relocate your headquarters halfway around the world, you're not standing by the arguments that you're making. You're protecting yourself against the negative impacts of something that you've argued for and something that's going to impact ordinary voters up and down the country negatively. So I think that's why I'm saying that James Dyson shouldn't have done what he said. I do want to come back to Suella's point, if I may briefly, about Calais. It's absolute rubbish to say that there aren't going to be extra administrative checks in the event of a no-deal Brexit. The guy who Suella is quoting, he's the chairman of the Calais Port Authority. It's in his interest to say that. He runs that business. Know. He's not the French government. He's not the EU. He's not the WTO, which sets the rules that says there will be border checks if we fall out of the EU, if we crash out. So it's because they set the rules. We'd be trading on WTO rules. Suella has been completely misleading in those comments, and that's the kind of misleading information which I think is so dangerous when it comes to a no-deal Brexit.
John, I've got to let John talk. John, I suspect we've heard from a future head of a FTSE 100 company just there, that young man. Yes. But what's your point?
What we heard from Suella is exactly why we're in this mess. This is exactly why Theresa May cannot get a deal that simply relies on Conservative colleagues like Suella Braverman. And this is why we will have no deal. We will risk crashing out with no deal unless we get a deal that reflects the sensible centre. And I tell you, if the government chaos continues, if we're threatened with a crash-out Brexit, if we don't reach this impasse, if people don't have, if her deal goes down again because she looks to people like this for support, then the case for a general election will only grow. They're failing on Brexit because they're divided. Well, I'm sorry, they're failing on Brexit.
You're not getting a terribly favourable response to that, John,
this is a failure not just of Theresa May, but this is a failure of the... Let me just finish this point, Nick, if I may.
OK, you must begin then, please.
This isn't just Theresa May's failure. You've seen tonight, this is a failure of the Conservative Party in government. All right. It is divided, it is dysfunctional, it is distracted, and that's why the case for a general election, I have to tell you, will only grow.
Give me 1 second.
Nick, briefly, because I'm going to need to move on in a moment.
For someone who talked about a kick in the groin earlier, you're talking a load of cobblers. That has to be said. To the lady here who said, let's listen to businessmen, yes, let's. Let's listen to Lord Bamford talking about JCB, the UK's largest manufacturer of construction equipment. He has no fear about a no-deal Brexit. Let's hear from Sir Rocco Forte, Chairman and Chief Executive of Rocco Forte Hotels. He has no problem about a no-deal Brexit.
We could certainly find examples of business people who do have fear of a no-deal Brexit.
But let's listen to businessmen and women. I agree.
Right. There's a forest of hands up, but I'm conscious that you've also submitted lots of other questions, so I'm going to move on in a moment. But before I do, I just want to pick up on something from last week's programme. There was some discussion about opinion polls. You may be aware of this. I was talking about a poll that came out on the day of the programme, which suggested the Conservatives were ahead. And the Shadow Home Secretary mentioned some other earlier polls which showed Labour in the lead. And we should have made that context clear, and I'm really happy to do that now. Now, I want to tell you about Question Time next week, which comes from Lincoln. And the following week, we are in Motherwell. And details of how to apply for the audience are on the screen. If you haven't got a pen and paper, don't worry. I will give you them again at the end. Look what's going on here. Why would you not want to join in? That's what I say. Don't you think, everybody? Right. OK. We are going to drag ourselves away from Brexit, just temporarily, and move on to another subject. So I'd like to come to Stephanie Price, please.
What should be done to protect young people from inappropriate social media content to help reduce levels of suicide and self-harm?
Now, I just want to put this in context for a moment, which, of course, I assume you're referring to, amongst others, to the case of Molly Russell.
Yeah.
A tragic case of a young girl who took her own life, just 14, and her father blamed her access to suicide imagery on social media for her death. That's his view. And he says, I have no doubt that Instagram killed my daughter. I have to say, I watched him speak. I don't know about you, it moved me to tears. I have to be honest about that. Sonia, what's your view on this?
I think this is an incredibly important question. So we know young people are spending more and more time on their phones, on social media platforms, and we also know that those social media companies, their whole business model, the way they make money, is by encouraging us to be nastier, more aggressive, more abusive to each other than we would be in real life, and it's got to stop. So I think there are a couple of things we should be doing. First of all, the government should be doing much, much more to clamp down on social media platforms. It's like the smoking industry, which makes money out of social harm. That's what social media companies do, and we've got to clamp down. In France, for example, last September, they've implemented a ban on mobile phones across all schools. I think we should be looking at doing the same here. But it can't just be about protecting our children from social media, because we can't wrap them in cotton wool. They will come into contact with it. So I think we need to think about how we equip them with the skills and the resilience to use social media safely. It's like training wheels on a bicycle. There's a really great website in Ireland called Cyber Smarties. It's a safe training social media platform for primary school children. And what it does is it encourages them to interact positively with each other. So, for example, if they're going to say something negative, it will encourage them to use more positive language. If they're feeling a bit sad, they can click on a button and see lots of positive messages from their friends. Now, that may sound a bit twee, but actually what we've got to do is encourage young people to go against the grain of what social media companies want us to do, which is to be mean to each other online and to be much more supportive and kind towards each other. And I think if we start with young children in primary school, that's something that we can do.
Stephanie, can I just come back to you a moment? What's your view about what should be done?
I think there is a need for greater regulation. I don't think you can simply rely on these companies to self-regulate, because they simply aren't doing enough, particularly looking at some of the things that have been mentioned this week about images which are very distressing being seen by youngsters next to a piece of advertising for something which they would be interested in. The companies clearly are not doing enough themselves.
The young woman in the audience, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, I think it's very easy to say that social media contains a lot of images that are sensitive and they're damaging, and it's true, it's definitely a big problem. But I think another problem we have to address is the availability of mental health services to young people.
Absolutely.
And it's just not there. It's just not there.
John Healey.
One-on-one counselling is just not being provided as it should be.
Absolutely.
John Healey.
It's a very, very important point. I think we're living through a period of huge change here. The social media companies are no longer the neutral platforms that they claimed several years ago was what their job is. They become the mass media. They become the mass broadcasters, I have to say, taking over from television and with their reach. And also they have a very particular sort of personal relationship with the people that use social media. So they have an access which the broadcasters haven't had in the past, and they've had to be pushed and need to be pushed further to accept that they have a duty of care and a duty to act when there is any abusive or exploitative material on their sites. But part of this, I have to say, is exactly as the young woman just said. Where do young people turn? And I've done a survey recently of the schools in our constituency, and it's quite shocking. Over the last 5 years, every single one of the schools has seen an increase in mental health problems, primary and secondary. Every single one of them has tried to refer pupils on. And it starts in primary school, where we have to get to a stage where we have a counsellor in every school, or for primary schools, access to a counsellor, because for many of these children, the teacher may be the one reliable, regular adult in their life. And we have to do much more to get much better, quicker referral for the specialist services that just aren't good enough at the moment.
If we come back to Stephanie's question, and you'll be surprised, actually, I'm going to let you, John, and you, Suella, off here. The BBC would neither seek to nor be able to run the sort of trash, the sort of sewer that is on social media. Neither would LBC, neither would any of the national newspapers I've worked on. These are companies that count their profits in the billions, and they turn round and say to us that they can't protect our children. It's not good enough. Well, for once, let these people off and start finding the companies a sort of money that will make their eyes water, and then put it towards ideas such as the mental health council that we need.
Yes.
I think when one person kills himself, it's tragic. When you've got 84 men killing themselves a week, that's a national tragedy that really needs to be looked at beyond the realms of what's displayed on social media. I think when you sort of conflate suicide with just what people are seeing online, you're not really tackling sort of the multi-facets of the issue. What's the issue? Point of access when you go to a GP.
Yeah.
Your GP is much more likely, because of how constricted the NHS is, to just recommend that you have an antidepressant instead of actually trying to treat what it is that's wrong with you. You're not going to get access to counselling that might help you, to solutions that might help you, such as maybe mindfulness or CBT or something like that, things that can actually help you. And I also worry when we have these discussions about, when we talk about regulating what's on the internet, how would you possibly regulate something as massive as social media? It seems to be a massive misnomer when we're dealing with mental health issues. We're not really tackling it at all. Yes, this girl's particular suicide may have been influenced by what she was seeing online, but there will be so many other failures that could have been stopped before this. This girl clearly wasn't getting adequate help that she needed, and this is something we really need to work on in this country, because we're losing so many young people. It's the biggest killer of men under 45. Something needs to be done by the government. Honestly, it's horrible.
Can I ask, is this something you're involved in, or that has touched you, the fact that you talk so passionately about it?
I've had a friend who's committed suicide a few years ago. I've had a friend who's tried to do it in more recent times. I've been involved in charities while I was at university that were there to prevent people who were having such thoughts. A charity called Nightline. I think if you're a student and you're having problems, you should look at Nightline, because they're across most campuses in the UK. So I'd really like to give them a shout out while we're on air. And if you have a problem, there's help that can be there for you. There's so many things out there. Just go online. Nightline can help you. Go to your GP, get the help you need.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Ian Amster, I'm wondering if this is something you've come across in connection with Stonewall.
Yes, I mean, for LGBT people, this is a huge issue. I think from yourself, sir, we've heard the most sense that we've heard all evening. I think you should be in the British Parliament right now, actually.
Do you want to take him up on the
you'd be a lot better than some of the rest of them. Look, I mean, the cost to the economy is huge in economic terms, but the cost in social terms is even greater. I find myself, I'm part of an initiative as well, Fiona, called Speakers for Schools, Robert Peston's initiative. And I was in Doncaster a couple of weeks ago talking to some 12-year-olds, and they asked some great questions. And one of them said to me, "What do you do about your own mental health?" And I kind of, wow, would I have had the bravery to ask that question when I was 12? Now, look, the problem we've got, and to be fair, John Mann actually asked this question of the Prime Minister in the Commons this week, and he was absolutely spot on, is that people are getting sticking plaster mental health services. They are getting not what they need. And we've tried to do this in our business, mental health first aid, and the response, Fiona, from our people at Cicero has been absolutely fantastic. It's the best thing we've ever done. But right now, all the NHS is able to do is put some sticking plaster in an emergency situation. And as we've heard this week, tragically, that's just far too late. Prevention is better than cure, and we need to get our politics to fund mental health services more.
The young woman at the back there.
On the note of prevention, platforms like Instagram, people who are influencers can get paid thousands of pounds to post something, anything random for a company. I think there should be more limitations on that. So they can earn thousands and thousands of pounds and companies can pay them this much money to promote things like diet pills and all these ridiculous products when actually, you know, maybe they are the root of the problems. So like diet pills are the root of, you know, a lot of eating disorders. They're only laxatives. They're not anything real. They don't do anything. Maybe there should be more limitations on what companies can pay, what they can advertise. Like adverts on the telly, for example, have way more limitations and things than Instagram and platforms like that. Maybe we should start looking into that as a prevention rather than look into the NHS for these horrible results that are happening that we just can't solve.
Yes.
The woman there.
The case of the girl in question is my friend's cousin's daughter. So when you have a personal connection...
What, Molly Russell?
Yeah, it's quite horrific, but the government needs to have a look at it. Social media companies need to have a look at it. When we've got private school children, or primary school children, already being affected by it, you know, 10, 11-year-olds before they leave primary school, by the time they get to secondary, it's complete bombardment.
Let's hear again for the young man in the stripy T-shirt.
I don't believe a single bad point has been made so far in this, on this question. I'd just like to get the answers from the panel. At what point does something posted on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, at what point does that move from nasty? At what point does that become not under free speech? So that we have a degree of free speech. At what point does free speech stop covering anything posted online? How nasty can something be, or how hateful can something be said on Twitter?
Suella.
Yes. Well, you ask a very good question. I just want to applaud the people who've talked personally and very movingly about their experiences. It takes a lot of courage to be open about mental health and the effects it has on all of us. In answer to your question, when does it become a crime? Well, you're right, there is a balance to strike between freedom of speech and causing harm to our fellow citizens. And once it tips that balance of inciting hatred, of harassment, of abuse, of unacceptable and intolerable language, then we are getting into the realms of unacceptable and criminal, potentially, language, and therefore we're talking about, you know, violating rules. But more widely on this issue, this is a complex issue. There are many advantages to the explosion of social media and technology. Many of us can book our holidays and buy our food online, but obviously there is a limit to which this needs to go, and tech companies need to start taking some more social responsibility about how they're running their operations.
And can you not make them do that? Is that not the role of government?
And I think the government does have a role, absolutely, in here, providing mental health services, but also in looking at how government can step in and actually prohibit the excessive and unacceptable proliferation of language. And the government is committed to this. To his credit, Matt Hancock, our Health Secretary, has talked very openly about mental health and how we have to try and take more action from a government point of view.
But what are you going to do about the internet? Hang on, Sonia,
okay.
wait. What are you going to do about the internet companies specifically?
Yeah. Well, there are various avenues that we're going down. We have passed it previously, a data protection bill, which is all about the capture of data. Facebook, we saw last year, was found to be guilty of capturing people's data without their consent. That's one example where they're transgressing rules of acceptable behaviour. And we have to absolutely look at where the government can step in, where laws can be made with enforceable sanctions so that tech companies, if they don't clamp down on abusive language, on the exploitation of child sexual pornography, which is a big problem online, or on other other bullying and cyberbullying, then there should be some sanctions where there is a line that has been crossed.
But Suella, I have to pick you up on something here because I saw you nodding along when Ian was talking about availability of services. And I'm not going to do a Nick and let the government off the hook because there was a big survey of GPs last year and they were asked about mental health services for young people. And the vast majority of GPs said they were worried about young people coming to harm because there just isn't enough availability when it comes to mental health services. We had GPs reporting delays of up to 18 months. GPs saying children now have to be suicidal before they get access to mental health services. And that comes back to resources and money. So no, Suella, you do not get to sit there and nod along when Ian talks about availability of mental health services. You were part of a government until just a few months ago that has not adequately funded the NHS and has not done enough about mental health. Warm words from Matt Hancock will not do. We need proper mental health support for our children, and that has to come from government funding.
Briefly.
The point here. And you're right, more can always be done, but this government has put record amounts of funding into the NHS, never seen
That is
before, actually.
untrue.
And when it comes
Untrue.
to mental health, we are making mental health on parity with physical health, so that the funding there is increasing, and we have seen record levels of money going into our mental health services. Always more that we can do.
Almost
I agree.
hang on to it. Almost a quarter of NHS patients wait more than 3 months to see a mental health specialist. You cannot be happy with that.
Yeah, there is always more that we can do. I'm not going to deny that. But I have to say as well, we mustn't deny what the government has done. It takes us very seriously. It is putting money, record levels of money, into our NHS, which includes our mental health services. We want to provide counselling services and proper psychiatric services for those in more serious cases, so that people don't get to these tragic circumstances where they're committing suicide or don't have anyone to talk to. There are services out there. It's about accessing them. And yes, government can always do more.
Can I John, I'm sorry.
It's simply not true. That
Very
this
briefly,
has
John,
been
'cause I need to move on to
8 or 9
another
years
area.
of record funding going into the NHS. This has been the period with the lowest increase year on year for the NHS since its history. And there are fewer mental health nurses now in the NHS than there were before your party came into office. My point, though, is broader. This need not
need to
be
make it
and
brief
should
as well
not
as broad.
be
Sorry, John.
a party political argument here. There is an urgent need and a wide consensus over beefing up and speeding up the support going into mental health. The position at the moment, one of the schools I went into had
John, I'm going to ask you to be brief. I'm sorry, but I really do have to ask you to be brief.
I will be brief. It really is to underline, we've had enormous improvements in our area, in South Yorkshire, in the children and young adults mental health service, which schools can refer on to. But just before Christmas, in one secondary school, 2 days before I went in, 2 pupils had tried to commit suicide. Both had urgently been referred to that specialist service, but neither met the criteria for support and service after that. They were back in the school, and that's where we can really make the difference. And government has got plans, but not until 2022. We've got to do more to speed this up, Suella. We can do that across party, and let's give some of the real priority to make what's always been a Cinderella service in our NHS what people need and can turn to when they're absolutely desperate.
It's a hugely important topic, and I'm so glad we've had a chance to discuss it this evening. I've got time just for one more question, so I'm going to go to Michael Mundy. Michael.
At what age should one no longer be allowed to drive?
Now, I'm assuming, Michael, you're asking this question because obviously the Duke of Edinburgh was involved in a collision. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. Duke of Edinburgh being 97. Now, Nick, I'm not saying you're 97, of course not, but you have got an important birthday coming up, I gather. So I wondered what your view is on this.
Do you know what, Michael? There are some people of 18 who shouldn't be allowed to drive, and there are some people of 95 who probably shouldn't be allowed to drive. I have concerns, as I understand it, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, that currently when you reach the age of 70, you effectively self-certify. You say that I'm OK. I have concerns about that. Having said that, we have to realise that living in rural areas, a car isn't a luxury, a car is a necessity. It is the only way that that person, perhaps elderly person, can get around, and with the loss of bus services and everything else, we have to be aware of that. The most important thing is that everybody got out okay from that accident. The most important thing is everybody got away from it. But I wouldn't want to live in a country where automatically when you reach 70 or 75, the presumption was we take your licence away. We probably need a check from an optician or a doctor or something like that, and that's the way forward I would suggest.
Ian.
So, my dad's 87. He's still driving. He's a better driver than me. And all the statistics still point to that. It's basically, it's young men when they first get a car.
Well, actually, let me give you some statistics. The risk of a driver aged over 70 killing a pedestrian, this is according to the Road Safety Foundation, is half that of drivers aged up to 25. Thought just worth mentioning.
That's exactly right, Fiona. And so, no, I mean, if I can say this, I agree with Nick.
Go on, knock yourself out.
I'm not
but you have to be quite brief. We've only got a couple of minutes left.
So, you know, regular testing, probably over 70, is a good idea. And, ladies and gentlemen, nobody is above the law. Everybody has to wear their seatbelt, prince or pauper.
Sue Ellen.
I'm not in favour of making knee-jerk reactions or passing laws based on high-profile cases. And I think that if we are going to look into this issue, we need to make it evidence-based. So I would be in favour of maybe the government consulting some kind of consultation with the medical profession, with the driving sector, with various community groups, to assessing what might be an appropriate balance to strike. But you're right, it's just been said, older drivers don't pose the highest risk on our roads. It's actually younger men. So...
I'm feeling younger already.
I know. So he's going to be so flattered. He'll definitely be coming back. Sonia, just briefly.
Well, I wonder if everyone should face a retest after a set number of years, because we can all become worse drivers. The thing I will say about older people in cars, though, is that for many of them, a car isn't a lifestyle choice like it is for Prince Philip. It's a lifeline out into the community. My granddad, before he died, he relied on his car. And if we were to introduce tighter controls on older people driving, I think we have to make sure there's a plethora of other services in the community, ways for them to get around, community centres, Meals on Wheels. But we know that in the last decade, a lot of that has been cut back. We've got a massive problem with isolation and loneliness and older people in this country. So I would be very reluctant to do anything that cuts older people off.
John, we've just got a few seconds left, I'm afraid.
Right.
Your view?
I'm not sure I fancy retests for older people, as a matter of course. My dad was nearly 90 when he ran into the back of a bus and took the decision for himself that he ought to stop driving. I think someone should sit down and give Prince Philip a really stiff talking to.
All your luck with that, John. All your luck.
And I'm not volunteering.
On that note, our hour is up. Next week we're in Lincoln, and the week after that we're in Motherwell. So you can call 0330 123 9988 if you'd like to be in the audience. It's fun. Come and join in. Or go to the Question Time website and follow the instructions. And, of course, if you want to have your say on tonight's topics, and we could have talked for an awful lot longer, I must say, you can join Adrian Charles and guests, of course, on Question Time Extra Time, which is on 5 Live now, and it's on Facebook Live. My thanks to our panel. My thanks to all of you for coming here. Thanks so much to you for watching at home. From Winchester, bye-bye.
Asking one big question about one big story from the news. Listen to Beyond Today. It's available now by downloading the BBC Sounds app. Next, looking at the Prime Minister's deal on the UK's route out of the EU. It's This Week.